An Industrial Development Corporation report shows that the combined exports of BRIC countries to the world at large had reached $3.2 trillion last year from $4.94 billion in 2001. This indicates the extent to which the bloc had become an important player in the global economy. Now, this week, the BRICS Business Council gathered for their inaugural meeting in South Africa, the first since the launch of the council in March. Joining me to unpack the critical issues raised between the government and business leaders is Dr. Iqbal Surve, who is a member of the BRICS Council, and of course he was appointed to that council by South Africa's President Jacob Zuma. Dr. Surve, thank you so much and welcome to Political Exchange.
Karema, thank you once again for having me on the program.
Now, of course, this gathering, the inaugural meeting, is an important first step to realizing the very lofty objectives which were, announced in Durban in March when the BRICS countries met for the first time on African soil. But already we saw that some of the business leaders showed a little bit of impatience with government, urging that governments need to now, dispense with the red tape, that they need to make it possible for investment to actually happen on the continent. What was the key message, Dr. Surve, of the business community to the various governments?
I think the business community essentially said to governments that we are serious about the engagement of the BRICS countries. But I think in fairness, government also said that. I think if you look at what we're trying to achieve as the BRICS Business Council, it took the Europeans and Americans in their various blocks, economic blocks, to do what we're trying to do over 30 years, right, over a couple of decades. So the amount of progress that we've made, considering the diverse nature of the BRICS countries, I think is tremendous. I mean, and I also think we have to acknowledge the really positive role provided by the South African government in supporting this initiative to date.
Now, of course, many people would argue that the architecture that was designed at BRICS, particularly in relation to the Council and, of course, the BRICS Bank, the Mooted Development Bank, is architecture that could potentially be a counterweight to your G20, your G8, to your Bretton Woods institutions. Some people hold that view and others say that that's an overstating, of the importance of these institutions. Dr. Surve, as someone who moves between both the developed and the developing world, you're very active in China, but you're also very comfortable in the capitals of, the US and the UK and so on. Where do you think these institutions are at? I mean, are we hyping it, or are we trying to copy institutions? What exactly would you say are the roles, of these institutions?
The BRICS Council doesn't approach its role in that way. So in other words, we don't start from the point that we are competing with other economic blocs. No, not at all. The fact of the matter is, it is the BRICS members that have saved the world economy. If it wasn't for the growth rates in the BRICS countries today, the world economy, and especially the developed world, would be in tremendous trouble. And in fact, the developed world has benefited tremendously from that engagement. So our view is that there's nothing wrong with the developed world and businesses in the developed world engaging with the BRICS economies, and therefore there's nothing wrong, with us engaging as BRICS countries together. Ultimately, it's about increasing trade between the BRICS countries. It's about making sure that there are business opportunities. But business or capital will go where the best opportunities sit. Those opportunities may, in 20, 30 years' time, be back in the developed world, but right now they are in fact in the BRICS countries, and of course in Africa, which is showing the highest growth rates out of the entire regions in the world over the last few years.
Now, of course, South Africa is the only African country participating in BRICS, but we do know that since the initiative was launched, that particularly President Jacob Zuma has done quite a bit to involve other African countries, particularly the larger economies like Nigeria, for example. Who from other African countries participated in the council proceedings, and exactly how did you allow that window of opportunity to occur for other African captains of industries, to make input?
From the outset, President Zuma made it very, very clear to us as the BRICS Council, the South African component of the BRICS Council, that we must be inclusive of African business leaders. And I guess we undertook a very ambitious project, which was a huge success yesterday at the summit, the BRICS Summit, where we invited the very best, I should say, and the most successful African entrepreneurs, including billionaires such as the richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote, including the richest woman in Africa, Isabel dos Santos. And if you think of any successful African billionaire or millionaire or multimillionaire entrepreneur,
they were there.
They were there. This was the first time every single African speaker who spoke on the summit said, the first time that African business of this capacity has come together. So I think we really have to acknowledge the role that our government, and in particular President Zuma, played in making all of this possible. What a wonderful event, you know. And I wish the world could have been at that summit yesterday to see what Africa is truly capable of.
Now, of course, it's one thing to say that we've gathered the best and the brightest and the richest on the continent to this gathering, but they don't all speak with the same voice all the time. We saw during the World Economic Forum, for example, Mr. Dangote having a very different view on how to grow businesses, particularly on the question of black economic empowerment, particular strategies that have taken other forms in other countries. Some people call it indigenization, others call it value add and beneficiation. How exactly, Dr. Surve, is the African business community going to develop the continent, not just for others to come and extract, but also to add that value chain and to harness African, collective strength to the benefit of the continent, instead of ending up as competitors to each other?
I think firstly, business can compete and they can cooperate. So those two do exist side by side. And we're always going to be competing with businesses, whether they're in Africa or whether they're outside of Africa.
Right.
I think the second point I need to make is that the BRICS Summit and the BRICS grouping is not just about people investing in Africa. It's also about Africans investing in the other BRICS countries. Now, the reason why that is important is because our role as the BRICS Council, and we've got various sectors which we can touch on a bit later, but our role is to ensure there's standardization across the BRICS countries in terms of technology, in terms of connectivity, in terms of the rule of law, in terms of localization of investment, meaning that if a BRICS member, a business person, invests in another country, they'll be treated in the same way in terms of a local business entity in another country, what is called national interest.
Right.
So it goes far beyond just individual businesses, of course, and it's about standardizing very much what the G8 and the G20 has done, and very much what they've done in Europe, for instance, with the Eurozone. So it's a process, and of course in that process you are going to have differences, and those differences are okay, and I think we have to listen to each other. And we have to find what is common more than what is different amongst us. Yeah.
Now, of course, this idea to create an enabling environment has to do with, aligning various regiments, whether it is around legislation, whether it's around, tariffs. And of course, all of that takes place within the context of existing global agreements and regional agreements. Let's take South Africa, Brazil, for example. We've had incidences where you've had the countries accusing each other of using locations to dump cheap markets. Some locals have argued that, we have to raise protection measures against cheap imports coming, not just from Brazil, but also from China and from India. How do those kind of tricky issues get navigated in the BRICS Council when the idea is to eventually emerge with consensus? And when we know, of course, that getting to consensus would be quite tricky, given the fact that your interests would be diverse on occasion?
Well, the BRICS Council is not the BRICS governments. I think we must make that very, very important distinction. Yes, the council members have each been appointed by the presidents in each country, but we're business essentially.
Right.
And our role is to look at how business between the BRICS countries can engage better with each other. In that respect, we play an advisory role to the governments.
But Iqbal, I'm quite curious about this, because for governments, national interest would be important.
Yes.
For businesses, profit and access to markets would be important.
Yes.
The two can perhaps bump up against each other. How do you marry it, given that this council is about getting synergy between government and the private sector?
I think, let me give you some very important examples of what can be done. The idea is to create a wider market,
right,
an intergroup trade. So the idea is that the BRICS trade, and I want to say the S in BRICS is Africa, not South Africa. So the idea is that they will triple over the next decade. That's the first thing. That in itself gives significantly more opportunities for business. So many people will see that there's greater opportunity as opposed to limitation on what they can and cannot do. That will quickly translate into the government sector as well. But the things that we're thinking about, for instance, is a national skills base, a national center of excellence, a national center of innovation. Certain countries are very good at certain things. For instance, the Brazilians may be very good at making aircraft. The Russians may be very good at industrial technology. The Indians may be very good at pharmaceuticals. And so on and so on. And I think what we would like to do is to make sure that there's a huge manufacturing base that's set up in Africa. I mean, we also have our own interests, by the way, as Africans. And we emphasize repeatedly, which was in fact in the final communique, that there needs to be value-added trade between the BRICS countries. These things are never going to be easy, but if you go back into history and you look at what I call political economic groupings, whether it's Bretton Woods or whether it's the G8 or the G20 or elements of other institutions, you're always going to find that in the formative stages there are great difficulties between countries, by the way. Sometimes there are great difficulties between businesses as well that compete at a multinational level. However, I think there is a very, very strong leadership by the BRICS presidents themselves to make sure that the BRICS Council and the business actually succeeds between the countries.
Now, the whole question of African interests is quite important, obviously, for us on the continent. How are you able, Iqbal, to harness African interests within that broader group, given the fact that, of course, your objective is to also, expand the world for African business to other continents and other shores? And were the Africans able to get some kind of consensus, at least on a very minimal program of what was kind of, have-to-haves in this round of consultations?
Yeah, I think there's a clear terms of reference, first of all, that's been set out for the various sectors that we're involved in. Be it manufacturing, be it financial services, and we can talk a bit about the BRICS Bank, be it ICT, healthcare, tourism, SMME development, by the way. But as Africans, we were at one in communicating that the time where Africa was simply about investing in resources is over. That 60% of the African population is under 35. We think that's a great opportunity to develop intellectual talent, a skills base, especially in innovation. And we made it very clear to our BRICS partners, and it was very much welcomed, by the way. I must say this. It's very, very welcomed by them, that Africa wants to play a very instructive role in terms of economic development. And this notion of Africa being a continent where you just see starving people and all sorts of things like that is nonsense. Young Africans are emerging, that are entrepreneurs, business people, that are academics, intellectuals, and we are asserting our rights. We are asserting our confidence as Africans, and more importantly, we are saying, hey, if you want to make money, come and make money with us on the African continent.
Not at our expense.
Exactly.
Well, we have to take a break, Dr. Surve, but when we return, we will continue our conversation.